His name was Derek. 36 years old, software engineer, meticulous spreadsheet guy. He'd been tracking his net worth since he was 28. Every bonus invested, every raise left untouched. 8 years of grinding, optimizing, sacrificing vacations, driving a used Honda Civic while his colleagues leased BMWs. And then one morning, he opened his Vanguard dashboard and saw it. $1,250,000. He had hit the number he had calculated 100 times on 100 different fire calculators, 25 times his annual expenses. The formula said he was free. So he walked into his manager's office and resigned. 18 months later, Derek emailed me. Not to share a success story. He had done everything right. He had followed the rules, and the rules had lied to him. Here is what nobody tells you about the FIRE movement's most sacred concept. The magic number isn't a finish line. It's a starting point for a completely different conversation, one that most retirement calculators, on most FIRE blogs, and most YouTube videos are not having with you. The number you calculated is real. Your math is probably correct. The problem is that the formula you used was built for someone else's life, someone else's timeline, and someone else's definition of retirement. And today, I'm going to show you exactly what I mean. Let's start with where the 4% rule actually came from, because this matters more than most people realize. In 1994, that's a financial advisor named William Bengen published a study in the Journal of Financial Planning. He analyzed historical market data from 1926 to 1992, nearly 7 decades of stock market cycles, recessions, wars, and inflation spikes, and asked a simple question. What is the maximum percentage a retiree can withdraw each year without running out of money? His answer was 4%. Withdraw 4% of your portfolio in year 1. Adjust that dollar amount for inflation each year going forward. And historically, your money would survive. He called it the safe max. The press shortened it to the 4% rule. The internet turned it into gospel. But here's what Bengen's study was actually measuring. He was testing portfolios over a 30-year retirement window. Not 40 years, not 50 years. 30. That was the design. That was the scope. He was solving for the traditional retiree, someone who stops working around 60 to 65 and needs their money to last until their late 80s or early 90s. That's a reasonable and well-defined problem. The FIRE movement took that 30-year answer and applied it to a 50-year question. And that is where everything starts to break down. Think about what it actually means to retire at 35. If you live to 85, and modern medicine is making that increasingly common, you are asking your portfolio to sustain you for 50 years. That is 67% longer than the scenario Bengen was modeling. The math does not scale linearly. A portfolio that has a 95% success rate over 30 years can have a 36 to 55% success rate over 50 years at the same withdrawal rate. That is not a footnote. That is a coin flip. So let's do the math. And I want you to really sit with these numbers. You're 35 years old. You spend $50,000 a year. You've calculated your magic number, $1,250,000. That is 25 times your annual expenses. The 4% rule says you're done. You're free. You resign. Here is what the formula didn't show you. For a 30-year retirement, the scenario the rule was designed for, a 4% withdrawal rate has roughly a 95% historical success rate. That's excellent. But for your actual retirement, which spans 50 years, That same 4% rate has roughly a 36 to 55% success rate, depending on the methodology used. That means in somewhere between 45 and 64 out of 100 historical simulations, your money runs out before you die. Before you die. What is the withdrawal rate that actually maintains a 90 to 95% success rate over a 50-year horizon? The research from PWL Capital and Vanguard's own Fuel for the Fire analysis converges around 3%, sometimes even lower if you want a true margin of safety. Let me show you what that means in dollars. At a 4% withdrawal rate, $50,000 per year requires a $1,250,000 portfolio. That is 25 times your expenses. At a 3.5% withdrawal rate, which most experts consider the floor for early retirees, you need $1,428,571. That is 28.6 times your expenses. At a 3% withdrawal rate, appropriate for a 50-year FIRE timeline, you need $1,666,667. That is 33 times your expenses. At 2.5%, ultra-conservative but defensible, you need $2 million, 40 times your expenses. Now here's where I want you to feel this, not just understand it. If you hit $1.25 million and you walked away from your income, you're not retired. You have roughly $416,000 less than the number your horizon actually requires. That gap, the money you believe you have but don't actually have for your specific plan, that is your ghost wealth. It looks real on a dashboard. It will not behave real over 50 years. I can already hear the objection forming. But Sam, the 4% rule is inflation adjusted. If I spend $50,000 in year 1, I just adjust for inflation in year 2. That's already in the formula. You're right. That is correct. The 4% rule is inflation indexed from day 1. I'm not arguing with that. What I am arguing is that the formula was tested over 30 years, not 50. And that distinction alone changes everything. The inflation adjustment is not the flaw. The timeline assumption is. That said, there is a second, separate problem that operates on top of the first one, and this one is almost invisible in standard FIRE planning. It's called sequence of inflation risk, and it is the most dangerous thing that can happen to an early retiree. Here's how it works. Imagine two retirees with identical portfolios and identical long-term averages. One retires into a decade of 2% inflation. The other retires into a period of 6 to 8% inflation for the first 5 years, which, by the way, is not a hypothetical. It happened between 2021 and 2023. The long-term averages might end up similar after 30 years, but by the time the second retiree reaches year 10, the compounding damage from withdrawing inflated dollars early in the retirement has permanently shrunk the portfolio's base. The math never catches up. Higher withdrawals early means less capital compounding later. And unlike sequence of returns risk, which at least allows for portfolio flexibility, sequence of inflation risk forces your hand. Your cost of living rises whether you want it to or not. This is especially brutal for early retirees because you have more years of potential exposure at the front end of retirement, when the damage is most severe and least recoverable. Now, I want to add one more number to this picture, because it puts the entire conversation in terrifying context. Each year, Northwestern Mutual publishes their Planning and Progress study. In 2025, they asked Americans how much they believe they need to retire comfortably. The answer, 1.2, $6 million. That is the national average of what Americans think they need. And that $1.26 million number is already too low for a 50-year FIRE retirement. But here's the part that should stop you mid-scroll. The National Institute on Retirement Security released data in early 2026 showing that the median American worker between 21 and 64 has approximately $955 saved for retirement. Among workers who actually have some money in a defined contribution plan, like a 401k, the median balance is $40,000. The average American is not debating whether their magic number is $1.25 million or $1.67 million. They are sitting $1.22 million away from a finish line that is itself already drawn in the wrong place. If you're watching this video, you're almost certainly ahead of that median. But understanding how broken the baseline is should make you more precise, not more comfortable. So what do you actually do with all of this? The first shift is moving from a static number to a dynamic model. I stop asking, have I hit 25 times? And start asking, what is my actual retirement horizon, and what withdrawal rate is appropriate for that horizon? If you are planning to retire at 35 and live to 85, your honest answer is 3% or lower, which means 33 to 40 times your annual expenses. That is your real target range. The second shift is building what researchers call a floor and upside strategy. This means separating your portfolio into two distinct structures. The floor is the portion designed to cover your non-negotiable baseline expenses, protected against inflation using instruments like Treasury inflation-protected securities, I-bonds, and a carefully structured Roth conversion ladder that guarantees tax-free income in the years before Social Security becomes accessible. The upside is the growth portion, broadly diversified index funds, left to compound, touched only when the floor has already covered your life. Now, this structure dramatically reduces your sequence of inflation and sequence of returns exposure in the early years, which is where the real risk lives. The third shift is understanding that your healthcare expenses inflate at 5 to 7% annually, far faster than general CPY, and that any FIRE plan that does not model healthcare costs separately is not a FIRE plan. It is a guess wearing a spreadsheet. None of this means FIRE is impossible. Yet it means FIRE requires a different number than the internet sold you. The freedom is real. The formula was incomplete. Derek eventually went back to work, part-time consulting, on his own terms, for clients he chose. Not because he failed, but because the number he had was designed for a 30-year retirement, and he wanted 50. Once he understood the difference, he stopped feeling like a failure and started working toward a real target. $1.7 million. A flexible income in early retirement to reduce portfolio withdrawal pressure, and a Roth ladder already in motion. That is not giving up on FIRE. That is doing it right. Your magic number is probably not wrong. It is probably just wrong for you. The formula does not know how old you are. It does not know how long you plan to live. It does not know that you are 35 and not 62. It gives the same answer to everyone. And that is the lie. Not one of malice, but one of misapplication. Run the numbers with your actual horizon. Build a floor. Target 33 times at minimum. And do not walk away from your income until the math is built for your life, not someone else's. If this video helped you see your finances differently, smash that like button and subscribe for more content that challenges how you think about money. I'll see you in the next one.